Yeah, well, thanks for coming out. Again, in the Senate, we're just trying to stick to the program that we had in place from the very get-go, and that is focusing on jobs, education, the budget, and trying to make the Senate work, as functional as it can. I think you've seen, from yesterday, no matter, there's different things that happen in this place, but we are remaining focused and getting the people's work done. And we'll continue down that road. When we say we're serious about, education funding, education reform, I think we've shown that not only through the reforms that we've passed off the floor, but we've also shown that through the budget. Annie can go into more details on that. But I think, there's lots of issues to talk about in Olympia. I think it's important, though, that as in business, you stay, with Pareto's principle as far as, look at the 80%, the 20% that makes the 80% difference, and focus on those. And I think too often in Olympia, what happens is we get too preoccupied with one issue or another that in the big scheme of things, although they might be important to different constituencies, aren't the real drivers as far as whether families have jobs, whether kids have a great education system, or whether we have, companies that want to either come into Washington State or stay in Washington State. So we're going to remain focused and do the people's business, and hopefully, we can get out of here on time, but that remains to be seen.
Does that mean you won't move the DUI bill, given that it's not fitting into the jobs, education, and budget?
Well, I think the DUI bills, there's a lot of things that we can do with regards to DUIs. I think too often in Olympia, one of the first things we do is we look at things that cost lots of money and maybe are simple solutions that are easy to explain. I think it's more important, and one of the things that we've tried to do is go to a very data-driven, measured format when we're looking at things. What's the biggest bang for the buck in trying to move these things forward? I think when it comes to driving while under the influence, there's several measures out there. Interlocks work, but one of the problems that we've seen is the people, especially the multiple offenders, don't have the interlocks. There's a simple way of addressing that issue is when you impound the car, basically you don't get your car back until there's an interlock. I think that there's been innovative things back in South Dakota as far as bracelets and the technology these days. I mean, Apple and Google and a bunch of others are going to be coming out with these watches. Everybody's going to be wearing these bracelets, and they can monitor alcohol consumption in that, and especially for multiple offenders. I think that technology will be on our side. So I think that there's a lot of things that we can do instead of always doing the knee-jerk reaction, which is, let's throw everybody in jail, when sometimes that's not the most effective means, and it certainly is not the most cost-efficient from a state standpoint.
What's the majority coalition's caucus problem or objection to the Reproductive Parity Act and the DREAM Act? It's you're going through an awful lot of procedural motions to defeat it. Just why does the majority caucus, or why does the Republican leadership is so hell-bent not to have it on the floor?
Well, I think it shows the broad diversity in our caucus. I mean, we have a lot of members like myself that actually support both of those measures. We have members on the other end of it. But again, what we're trying to do as a caucus is make sure that we stay focused on the issues that really matter, and those are those pocketbook issues as far as jobs, making sure we have a great education system both at the K through 12, higher ed, and early learning. And so those are the real focuses, and I think you've seen that demonstrated not only from a policy standpoint, but demonstrated from a budget and fiscal standpoint, which is the real measure of where people's beliefs are in politics.
What's the problem with just having your caucus split a vote on a couple bills and not, not vote as a 25 vote thing,
Well,
Let the ones who
right.
don't like it vote that way, and the ones who like it vote another way. That's people cross the aisles, I'll say somewhat routinely in the legislature.
Well, John, I'll say that, if people want to make a legislative rule that, as soon as you get to 25 and if you get to 50 in the House, but I can guarantee you we have a lot of reforms over in the House where we could get to 50, and guess what? They're never seeing the light of day. Issues have different constituencies, and, when you have majorities, different majorities have different focuses and different hot button issues.
So would this be a bargaining chip in the upcoming talks? Or in the current talks with the House?
Well, I think when it comes to what we're really focused on as far as, if you were to consider bargaining chips would be, major reforms. I don't think this is more of a policy issue, not a reform issue.
What about the workers' comp bills and some of the education reform measures that have passed out of this body that I guess it's do or die day over in the House for them? Is their fate decided today? Can they be brought back as part of the final budget negotiation? Are you on pins and needles about those? What's the status?
Well, as everybody here in Olympia knows, until we leave, until our final day, every bill, through some form of magic or another, is, always alive. And so, we are going to be very adamant on some of those reforms in order for us to get a budget that works and for Andy to get a budget that works, for those reforms to be part of any package that we're going to be able to get and feel comfortable with the Senate.
So today's cutoff would, while it's a real deadline, it's not a fatal day for these measures.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But are they technically dead at the end of the day?
In the House, that's kind of a distinction without a meaning, right? when it's important. You've seen this longer than I have, that things can come up at any time as part of the end game.
Back to John's question on there's a glass ceiling in the House that we run into all the time. As far as we've got a bill that's controversial in the majority caucus, they want 50% of their votes before they'll run it on the floor. So it's interesting considering their opposition to a 2/3 vote, but then to require basically 75% vote to move anything controversial, you've got a problem.
Can you talk about where you guys are at on budget negotiations? Senator Hill, have you met already with Representative Hunter, and can you talk a bit about what those talks have been like?
Yeah, I've met briefly with Hunter. I've met briefly with the governor's office. To a large degree, we're waiting for the House to move a lot of the revenue bills because right now their budget doesn't work without an awful lot of revenue and without sweeping the constitutional rainy day fund.
Why do those need to pass before you guys can even talk about it? Because I'm assuming that even if those bills pass, some of them may not be part of the final product, so why do you have to wait for those bills to come out?
Well, for their budget to work and to be legitimate, they have to show that their budget can work. And right now, you can do a press release and say that we've got $1.3 billion worth of tax increases, and you can spend an awful lot of money, do an awful lot of things with that money, but until it's been passed, that isn't real money. And so to negotiate over what to do with that $1.3 billion doesn't make a lot of sense if they don't have the votes for it.
So you guys might not be negotiating until the last week of session?
Well, they're going to hear their tax bills on Friday. We're certainly talking. We have smaller groups that are getting together and talking about places where there's common understanding. But to a large degree, if you don't have a budget that works, it's a press release.
So what do you do if they don't
At this
pass
point,
the
they've got a budget that is not funded, but they also have a single bill that we're going to hear on Friday that overfunds it. The omnibus package includes about $1.3 billion of sort of you name it taxes. What that'll end up nobody knows. It's not really fair to the people that are affected so much by changes in tax rates to be negotiating that budget before what's going to affect them the most has even been heard. And I guess another thing that I'd like to point out is if you listen to the debate, you heard Representative Santos talk about they were funding education by closing exemptions on the few. Look at this list of potential taxes. These aren't on the few. These are on Main Street. And it's important that those things be pointed out, which is why I'm glad that we're having a hearing on Friday.
If they pass everything that's set for the rainy day money, do you negotiate then, or how much is enough?
Well, they should, I think it's incumbent upon us to have a full budget, and it's incumbent upon them to have a
So
full
if they
budget.
don't have a full budget, you just don't negotiate? At some point, you have to talk.
No, we'll negotiate, but we're gonna start our negotiation from that point. We're not gonna negotiate with ourselves. They need to come up to a real number, and if they can't come up with 2 or 3 or 400 million, then, they need to take 2 or 3, 400 million off of the spending before we start the negotiation.
I think they passed that much last night, didn't they, with the Bracken and the telecom decisions?
But not in,
They're well short.
they're well short of their billion.
Their
Correct.
overall amount.
Correct.
A standard thing I hear from your side of the aisle is regarding the House, it's essentially Frank Chop's duchy, other than the rainy day fund. You've got the iron fist, the iron hand of Frank Chop.
We'll
running the
let you
place.
have that quote.
But essentially, except for the rainy day fund, they're pretty well, politically, they're probably well guaranteed to get everything but the rainy day fund, just because they've got an overwhelming majority in the House with a very strong leader in charge.
Well, that's true, but if that's the
Can't you guys
case,
at least do some preliminary?
why haven't they
debates?
moved any bills? They've had the 2/3 to blame for years. They don't have that this year. They've talked about dozens of different taxes that they want to raise, and for the first time, we see a bill. And I think they need to decide what is it that they're finally going to run and actually take votes on.
Okay, but they started a week after you did, and they have tax bills and you don't, so they have
Well, I'm not complaining.
basically, they have a bigger set of chores to do starting at a later date.
Yeah, I'm not complaining about them being behind. I'm saying that it doesn't make sense to beat up on the Senate coalition when they haven't finished their job yet.
Senator Tom, Senator Hill, as you obviously know, the House has, they're waiting for the Senate to pass some bills that they believe your budget's predicated on, the policy bills that
Right.
deal with savings, so that your budget doesn't work, because you're assuming savings that you haven't done. So what's your plan for moving those policy bills that are NTIV for your budget? Because they make the same argument.
We'll be starting that process, cutoff is today, and, there's tomorrow, Friday, and, early next week, so we will
Yeah,
be starting that process.
We're taking care of all the bills that aren't needed to implement the budget right
So
now.
you're saying
'Cause
tomorrow
we have a
is
5 o'clock,
deadline?
yeah, we have a
Right.
5 o'clock deadline today.
You haven't felt any compunction to go faster and to get
Well, there's always, we're trying to help the House, and, there's a lot of pressure anytime there is a deadline on some of these issues. If we started running all of our budget bills, we'd probably see some of our bills, so, over there that we want passed from a policy standpoint. So I think that there's a recognition that we need to keep, our process moving. They're going to keep their process moving, and then after cutoff, we'll start to deal with those issues that are necessary, and those will be the ones related to the budget.
Just to be clear, in terms of process, the criticism from Ross Hunter was that your budget had some underlying premises that he questioned. And so I'm wondering, where are you in terms of passing those underlying bills necessary to implement the budget? I'm thinking specifically around higher ed, for instance.
They're on the docket once we get through these these policy bills.
So, just to be clear, when you say that it's not really, doesn't make sense to start the negotiations with the House yet, because they still have to essentially pass,
Right.
how is their situation different than the situation we're here in terms of where you are in passing the budget and bills of certain?
Well, I think there's an order of magnitude problem. I mean, their budget counts on $1.3 billion worth of new taxes. We have a number of bills we need to implement our budget, but I don't think they're at, I think if you add them up, they're not gonna add up to anything close to.
So, what we
You know,
see-
they solved part of that last night, but they're still close to $1 billion underfunded on their budget. And it's hard to negotiate on a budget predicated on tax raises that we haven't seen yet. We haven't seen that final package. And if it's not good enough to bring out and put on the floor for a vote, you know, it causes a lot of consternation.
So when will we see the bill that would shift the DNR trust money from construction to operations?
We'll see it in the
Next few days.
next few days.
Okay, well, here's one thing that I'm wondering. There's been a lot of talk about how Gary Alexander has some sort of an innovative budget proposal that has a lot of interesting ideas in it, too. Is that going to be something that is formally released in some manner? He
You know,
seemed to
we're-
be alluding to it on the floor last night.
We're going to try to use that in the way that is the most productive. And as you probably know, we moved the Senate budget as a striker in appropriations because we thought that the way that we could move the process forward the best was to support that budget that more closely adheres to, you know, what our appropriations people feel. We've shared our budget with both sides. I was in a meeting that included Ross Hunter and Pat Sullivan. You know, there's a little more collegiality than is apparent sometimes there. And I think at some point that budget can be a constructive step, but not yet.
So it sounds sort of like a secret plan to end the session.
That
No,
would be
I
a
think the
nice
secret
outcome.
plan is, you know, we just pass out the Senate, that's a fully baked budget. We go home, and if they're not ready, because they can't get all their taxes, they can just take our budget, and we're good to go.
Okay.
What's your
Is that-
preference on going to special session, starting it immediately after this one, or waiting till June?
I think our preference is not to go to special session.
But do you
And
see
I
any
don't sense a
way?
real urgency to avoid that outcome, though.
You know, this being my 11th year and having done budgets, you're always like, you know, we're past the point, we're going in, and there's a lot of magic that always happens in this place.
Not
So,
lately, though. You've gone to the special session year after year after year.
Yeah.
so, but, you know, I think, you know, we've been very clear as far as, one, we don't think we need to go into special session, and two, we think, you know, we'll pass out a Senate budget that we think meets the needs of Washington. It's been incredible as far as its emphasis on education. And then, you know, let's go have a conversation. Let's go have a roadshow. Let's Mark, myself, and Andy get in a car, and Frank and Ross and Pat can get in a car, and let's go to 20 towns in 7 days, and let's talk about our vision as far as how the budget works. And let's see where Washington is on that. And I think what you'll see is they're going to like our budget a lot better because the conversation that they've been hearing for so many years is the only way that you can fund education is through new taxes. And I think we've been very clear in our budget that that's not the case. You can have a bipartisan budget. 9 Democrats supported the Senate budget, and do it in a manner that is good for education, especially when you couple it with the reforms there. You make fundamental changes to the system. And I think, you know, we didn't go through the process that we went through so that we could make minor tweaks. We went through to make fundamental changes to the way Olympia operates. And I think, you know, you will see us hold true to that.
Okay, I got to challenge you on the not having to go to special session, mainly because it's the 17th. It's 11 days away. Everyone has to pass bills. Everyone has to negotiate. And the two sides are so fundamentally far apart. How can you say there's not going to be a special session?
Well, what I'm saying is I don't think there needs to be one. I'm saying that I think that if you look at what voters, what their preferences are, I think if you look at what the governor campaigned on, as far as no new revenue and an emphasis on education, I think our budget lives up to not only the spirit that the voters want, but the spirit that the governor was elected in. And I think with that, we have a budget that we think, manifests those wishes.
The only cards that aren't on the table now is the revenue package from the House. Basically, everything else is out there.
Senator Tom, you just described the process of basically town halls on the budget. In between the end of the regular session and the start of special session, have you talked to the governor about it, something like that?
No, but I don't think you sit there and plan for special session. I think it's incumbent upon us to try to get this done within the confines of 105 days. But I will say, if you look at history over the last 10 years, if I'm the speaker, and I've won quite a bit by going to special session, and that seems to be the tool that has helped me get the policies and the taxes that he wants. It wouldn't surprise me that when you have a strategy that's worked, if you don't go to that strategy again.
Now, let's see, forgive me if this was already addressed in the minute or so that the press conference was already going on when I walked in here, but I was thinking that it might be appropriate for you guys to say something about the leadership change in the House and what it means and that sort of thing.
Sure. Well, I think most of you know, and I spoke to some of you individually this morning, but Richard DeBolt stepped down this morning as minority leader. He's been having health issues. This goes back several years. He had an episode in China a couple years ago, and then a number of different things went wrong after he got back. He's been in treatment for that. It's been pretty good for a couple of years. He started feeling worse in November, and noticeably worse, and just had more trouble last week. Kind of ended up in an emergency room. I think it was Wednesday night, and part of it, some of the things that he's supposed to stay away from is junk food, salt, coffee, stress. And if you know what this place is running on right now, it's all of those things, so.
Not in my office.
But, I feel a little guilty. I was one of the people that talked him into staying 2 years ago. He had serious considerations of leaving then. Looking back on it, he should have. He's waiting on tests. He's got some stomach issues. They're being treated now. Should have tests back Friday. We're hoping, with good results. But, there's still some things up in the air. One of the things that hit him was, laying in the hospital the other night and thinking about tomorrow's his boy's 16th birthday. And that's something that he's missed just about every year, like all of us do, family events. And his doctor is basically telling him to avoid stress, and he needs to change his lifestyle a bit. So he's planning on staying on as a member. For now, we're hoping he'll feel good enough to be up here at least part-time for the rest of session. And, we're just holding him up in our thoughts and prayers and his family, and pray that he's able to recover.
Can you say something about where you go from here in terms of leadership?
That's kind of up in the air. I've been talking to him the last few days, and I'll tell you where I felt at peace about what he was thinking was yesterday. I went down to see him at the house, and he's sitting there with a pillow over his stomach because he's got some pain. But he looked so relaxed, and you think about how people's faces change when they get out of here and they're in their real world, and that's when I felt at peace. He still hadn't made a decision on when he wanted to do it or announce or what the schedule was. So he made the decision, and I found out this morning that he was just going to do it immediately and try and step back. He'll be a resource. What we'll do, we really haven't had a chance as a leadership team to sit down and discuss what we're going to do. I'm thinking that we'll do a reorg sooner rather than later and get things figured out. But we've got a really strong leadership team, good people there, and what we're going to do is just kind of pull together. And we've been doing it the last week or so anyway, and we'll run it as a decision with the leadership team, and if we don't have time for that, I'll make the calls. So I'll be acting minority leader for now.
I'd like to ask just about one specific bill, and that is during the whole debate over in the House, or hold-up, I guess, while they were determining whether to debate on the background check bill, they did pass this measure that requires somebody with a restraining order to give up their firearms, and I believe that that was amended somewhere along the way to where there needs to be a judicial finding that the person actually poses an imminent threat. There are advocates outside the doors who are talking to anybody and everybody, including reporters, saying that bill might be in peril over here. I just want to get a sense of is there an intention to pass that? Is there a problem with it?
There's some members with concerns on it. There's, I think, another bill out there that we're also looking at that is kind of firearm related. So, we still have several hours to go through some of these, but on that bill there is some concerns, but it's an important bill for some people. So,
is it viewed as, or do you view it as a firearms bill or a domestic violence?
I think, people have different views throughout the caucus on that. Obviously, there's some that are concerned with the Second Amendment rights and how you would be able to take those away without, a full, trial, or, it kind of sets a precedent that's generally not there in law as far as a constitutional right, no matter what that right might be, being able to be taken away without, full due process. And so that seems to be the concern, and we'll see if we can work through that issue in the next couple hours. But, there's a lot of other issues out there.
Forgive the question on one particular bill, but since it was one of the things that actually moved out of that place.
And then, Ann can probably talk a little as far as, transportation. Obviously, is another big component that, we're going to be addressing in the next little bit.
Senator, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So we'll be, tomorrow, we'll be voting on our transportation budget. And that's sort of the last piece that's going to be moving out of the Senate in terms of trying to get the finances all squared away, focusing on some reforms, focusing on taking care of maintenance level activities for transportation, and eagerly awaiting what comes over to us from the House in terms of budget and in terms of package. At this point, I do not see the Columbia River crossing receiving any funding in any package that would be supported by the members of the Majority Coalition Caucus. And anything that would be in our budget, in our transportation budget, would be to assure that we've got the best possible project as we move forward.
Did you move your budget out of the Senate Transportation Committee?
It will be tomorrow. That's why I was.
So is Senator Benton and others moving their amendments that they were putting forward?
There will be some amendments that are all agreed upon at this point.
Do those take out the Columbia River Crossing funding that was amended?
No, they put strong sideboards about what that money can be used for.
Do you believe that the federal money will go away if?
I do not believe that. I've been hearing that every year for the past 5 years.
So the goal, or you're trying to slow things down, you want to relook at the spending and at the design, but you think that this does not put off the project for another decade?
My dad was a carpenter, and he always said, measure twice and cut once. So far, the measurements on the CRC just aren't adding up. So we need to make sure that our measurements add up before we make that final cut. That's a heck of a commitment for us to make. Currently, there's no money in any of the pots that the feds have been promising. There's no money there, so we're being told that there's all this money, and the reality is that the projects of regional and national significance, that pot of money has no money in it. So we just need to make absolutely sure that we're moving forward prudently and that we're not overburdening the people of southwestern Washington in this project.
And what's the appetite for the House's slimmed down transportation funding package, the gas tax increase?
Well, that also has $450 million for the CRC, so the appetite is.
Well, what if you
if you took that out? That's a discussion that we're going to have as a caucus. We talked about the idea that we were going to move Washington forward based on reforming, working to create a world-class educational system and restoring the economy and those kinds of things. Part of it was a tax question. Where were we going to be on taxes? But just getting back to the CRC, we can't be penny wise and pound foolish. People say, oh, it's 1,700 construction jobs that we need to have to boost our economy, neglecting the 3,000 plus family wage jobs that will be taken away if the bridge is actually built as proposed. So I think we're going to be looking at all of that as we move forward. The bill's not before us, and so I'm sure we'll have full and robust discussions about that.
But we've been really clear as far as any consideration on a transportation package that, there's going to need to be reforms with that, because I think the last thing that we want is for a package to come out of Olympia and then there to be a vote of the people and for that to go down. So I think in order for the people to have confidence that their dollars are going and being as stretched as they can, and there's real value in that package, there's going to, obviously, there's always the selection and prioritization of the programs themselves. In this case, just because of the backlog in maintenance and preservation, that's taking probably a larger portion than you'd normally see in a transportation package. So with that as a backdrop, we also think, though, that it's critical that we get some of these fundamental reforms that Senator King and Senator Rivers have been talking about, in making sure that when we can go to the voters, and this is going to be a vote in November, we can explain to them why we did the vote that we did, and that there's value in it.
Is there time? Is there time to do all that? Is there time for the House to move their transportation revenue package over to the Senate and for you to get the reforms that you want in the next 11 days?
No, I think, in the next 11 days, those are things that can be done. Again, it just depends on the sense of urgency that we all adopt.
Are you saying that the Senate would require a referendum clause, or are you just anticipating that anything that passes would be subject to that?
Well, to me, we haven't spent a whole lot of energy and political capital on the argument of should it have a referendum or not have a referendum, and I don't think that there's anybody in this room or in Olympia that thinks that whether we put it on or Tim Eyman puts it on, there's going to be a vote in November. So we're like, let's not spend our political capital there. Let's focus on the issues that deliver value. We're going to have a vote, okay? Let's have a vote, but let's make sure that when we have that vote, the people see the value in the reforms so that we can go forward with the projects that we've all prioritized that will move Washington forward.
So you're saying referendum clause is a requirement?
I just think that we're wasting our time in efforts, arguing over whether we should or shouldn't. I think also that it brings probably some votes that wouldn't normally be there without it. And I don't want a transportation package that comes out of here squeaking through with 25 votes.
Final question.
Were you concerned about the strong pitch that the governor made with railroad for the Columbia Basin, or for the Columbia River crossing? I mean, did it move any hearts or minds?
I would say it galvanized us as a caucus against the project.
Why is that?
Because what I felt very strongly is that Mr. LaHood was doing his very best to inject Washington, D.C. politics into Washington state politics, and it was not received well. We are not the other Washington. We do not want to be the other Washington, and we will not respond well to that type of politics here in our state.
Thank you.